Chapter 1, Shattered Homecoming. The scorching midday sun beat down relentlessly upon the narrow, dusty streets of the Gaza Strip, its harsh glare offering no respite to the weary inhabitants who had long since grown accustomed to its relentless onslaught. In the heart of this embattled enclave, the modest yet dignified home of the Al-Salam family stood as a testament to the resilience and determination of those who refused to be broken by the unforgiving conditions of the occupation. Gaza, a young woman of unwavering spirit, swept the threshold of their humble abode, her calloused hands moving with a practiced rhythm that betrayed the weight of her responsibilities. Beside her, her younger brother Abbas sat listlessly, his eyes narrowed against the glare, his mind seemingly a million miles away from the oppressive reality that surrounded them. "The market is nearly empty again," Gaza murmured, her voice tinged with a note of resignation. "We will need to ration the supplies we have if we are to make it through the week." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the horizon, where the silhouettes of the imposing Israeli watchtowers stood like silent sentinels, a constant reminder of the invisible yet ever-present shackles that bound their community. Abbas nodded solemnly, his fingers tracing the worn wooden frame of the doorway, as if seeking solace in its familiar contours. "Father would have known what to do," he whispered, his words laced with a profound sense of loss. It had been only a few short months since the Al-Salam family had been torn apart by the relentless barrage of the occupation. Their father, a respected community leader and a beacon of hope for many, had been caught in the crossfire of a violent clash between the resistance fighters and the Israeli forces, his life snuffed out in an instant, his dreams of a better future extinguished. Gaza's heart grew heavy with the weight of her memories, the images of that fateful day seared into her mind. She recalled the acrid smell of smoke, the deafening roar of explosions, and the anguished cries of her father as he had crumpled to the ground, his life's blood seeping into the parched earth. In the aftermath, their home had been reduced to a pile of rubble, the remnants of a life they had once known scattered amidst the debris. "We must carry on," Gaza said, her voice infused with a quiet determination. "For his sake." She reached out and squeezed Abbas' shoulder, her touch a silent plea for him to find the strength to persevere. Abbas lifted his head, his eyes brimming with a mix of grief and resignation. "But how, Gaza? The occupation tightens its grip every day, and the blockade leaves us with little means to sustain ourselves. Our home is gone, and our father." His voice trailed off, the unspoken weight of their loss hanging heavy in the air. Gaza's expression hardened, her jaw set with unwavering resolve. "We will rebuild, Abbas. We will find a way to survive, and one day, we will reclaim our rightful place in this land." She swept her gaze across the scarred landscape, her eyes narrowing as she caught sight of the distant silhouettes of Israeli tanks patrolling the perimeter. "The resistance fights on," she continued, her voice tinged with a newfound urgency. "Their struggle is our struggle, Abbas. We must stand with them, for our father's sake, for the sake of our people." Abbas opened his mouth, a protest on the tip of his tongue, but the sound of approaching footsteps cut him off. Both siblings turned to see a group of Israeli soldiers, their weapons gleaming in the harsh sunlight, striding purposefully towards their battered home. Gaza's heart pounded in her chest, her fingers instinctively tightening around the broom she held, ready to defend her family's meager sanctuary. Abbas, however, remained motionless, his face a mask of resignation, as if he had resigned himself to the inevitable. The soldiers halted before them, their commanding officer stepping forward, his expression unreadable. "The occupants of this dwelling are to be relocated immediately," he announced, his voice devoid of any trace of sympathy. "This area has been designated a military zone, and all civilians must evacuate within the hour." Gaza stared at the soldier, her mind racing as she grappled with the implications of his words. Relocated? Evacuation? Her family's home, the only place they had known, was to be taken from them, the few remnants of their life torn away by the unyielding grip of the occupation. But this is our home, she protested, her voice shrill with desperation. Where are we to go? We have nowhere else to. The soldier's cold gaze silenced her, his hand resting casually on the grip of his weapon. That is not our concern. You have 1 hour to gather your belongings and leave. Any resistance will be met with force. With that, the soldiers turned and marched away, their boots kicking up clouds of dust that stung Gaza's eyes, choking her with the bitter realization of their powerlessness in the face of the occupation's might. Abbas placed a trembling hand on Gaza's arm, his eyes pleading with her to remain calm. We must do as they say, sister, he murmured, his voice barely audible. We cannot risk their wrath. Gaza stared at him, her disbelief and anger warring with the overwhelming sense of helplessness that threatened to consume her. How could her brother, her own flesh and blood, so meekly accept the loss of their home, the destruction of their family's legacy? How can you say that, Abbas, she hissed, her voice quivering with emotion. This is our home, our life. We cannot simply abandon it, not after everything we've endured. Abbas lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping in defeat. What choice do we have, Gaza? The soldiers will not hesitate to use force, and we cannot protect ourselves against their might. We must accept our fate and move on, for our own safety. Gaza's jaw tightened, her resolve hardening like steel forged in the crucible of adversity. Then you may go, Abbas, she said, her voice laced with a quiet determination. But I will not surrender our home without a fight. I will not let our father's memory be tarnished by our cowardice. Before Abbas could respond, Gaza turned and strode back into the house, her steps quickening as she began to gather what few possessions they had left, her mind racing with a desperate plan to defy the occupiers and hold on to the last remnants of their shattered lives. Chapter 2. Diverging Paths. As the last of the Israeli soldiers marched away, their heavy boots kicking up a cloud of dust that stung Gaza's eyes, a deafening silence settled over the Al-Salam family's shattered home. Abbas stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the retreating figures, his heart sinking with the weight of their command. We have no choice, Gaza, he murmured, his voice tinged with resignation. We must gather our things and leave, before they return with more force. But Gaza refused to be cowed, her determination burning brighter than the relentless sun that beat down upon them. With a defiant shake of her head, she turned and strode back into the house, her steps resolute as she began to hastily gather the few belongings they had left. I will not abandon our home, Abbas, she declared, her voice firm and unwavering. This is our land, our history. We have survived too much to simply walk away now. Abbas watched, his brow furrowed with worry, as his sister moved with a sense of urgency. He knew deep down that she was right, this was their home, the only place they had ever known. But the threat of the Israeli soldiers, their weapons a tangible reminder of the occupation's ruthless power, weighed heavily on his mind. Gaza, please, he pleaded, his hand reaching out to grasp her arm. Think of our safety, our family. We cannot risk the soldiers' wrath. There is nothing left for us here. Gaza paused, her gaze meeting her brother's, and for a brief moment, the siblings' eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. The pain and sorrow that had etched itself into their young faces was palpable, a testament to the trials they had endured. Nothing left? Gaza whispered, her voice laced with a quiet intensity. Our home, our memories, our father's legacy, they are all that we have left, Abbas. If we abandon this place, we surrender everything that made us who we are. With a heavy sigh, Abbas relented, his shoulders slumping in resignation. He knew that once Gaza had set her mind to something, there was little that could sway her. And in this moment, her unwavering spirit was the only thing that kept the last embers of their family's hope alive. Very well, he conceded, his voice barely above a whisper. But promise me, Gaza, that you will be careful. I cannot bear the thought of losing you, too. Gaza's expression softened, and she reached out to squeeze her brother's hand. I promise, Abbas. We will weather this storm together, as we have always done. With renewed determination, the siblings set about the task of packing what few belongings they could salvage from the wreckage of their home. Gaza carefully wrapped the tattered remnants of their father's prayer ashore, her fingers tracing the intricate embroidery with reverence. Abbas gathered the handful of photographs that had miraculously survived the destruction, his gaze lingering on the images of their family before the occupation had torn them apart. As they worked, the sound of distant gunfire and the occasional rumble of military vehicles served as a constant reminder of the perilous world that lay beyond the crumbling walls of their home. Gaza's heart raced with a mixture of fear and defiance, her mind racing with a desperate plan to defy the occupiers and hold onto the last vestiges of their lives. When at last their meager possessions were gathered, the siblings stepped out into the harsh glare of the afternoon sun, their eyes squinting against the glare. The once vibrant neighborhood had been reduced to a ghost town, its streets abandoned save for the occasional stray dog or the distant silhouette of a soldier patrolling the perimeter. As they made their way through the debris-strewn alleys, Gaza couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss and sorrow. This had been their home, the place where they had grown up, where they had shared countless memories with their beloved father. And now, it was all but lost to them, reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. Abbas walked beside her, his gaze downcast, his steps heavy with the weight of their circumstances. Gaza reached out and squeezed his hand, a silent gesture of comfort and solidarity. They may have lost their home, but they still had each other, and that, in itself, was a glimmer of hope in the darkness that now enveloped their lives. The siblings' journey eventually led them to the small, dilapidated apartment that had become their temporary refuge. It was a far cry from the spacious, sun-drenched home they had once known, but it was all they had left. As they stepped across the cramped threshold, Gaza felt a surge of determination well up within her. This may not be their home, but it was where they would make their stand. She would not allow the occupation to strip them of their dignity, their resilience, or their fight for a better future. In the days and weeks that followed, Gaza's commitment to the resistance movement only grew stronger. She began to attend clandestine meetings, listening intently as the community's elders discussed strategies for combating the occupation. Her eyes burned with a fierce determination, her mind racing with ideas on how she could contribute to the cause. Abbas, on the other hand, seemed to withdraw further into himself. He spent his days in near silence, his gaze often unfocused, as if he had retreated into a world of his own. Gaza would try to coax him out of his shell, to engage him in the fight for their freedom, but his responses were always muted, his spirit seeming to have been broken by the relentless weight of their circumstances. One day, as Gaza was preparing a simple meal for their meager dinner, Abbas finally broke his silence. "I've been approached by the Israelis," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Gaza's heart seemed to stop, the knife she held slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. She stared at her brother, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and horror. "What are you saying, Abbas?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've been approached by the Israelis? What do they want from you?" Abbas shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the floor. They've offered me a job. A chance to work for them, to provide for our family." Gaza felt a wave of nausea wash over her, her mind reeling at the implications of her brother's words. "You cannot be serious, Abbas," she hissed, her voice laced with betrayal. "You would betray our people, our father's memory, for the sake of a paycheck?" Abbas raised his head, his eyes pleading with his sister to understand. "Gaza, please, you must see reason. We have nothing left, no way to sustain ourselves. This could be our only chance to survive." Gaza shook her head, her expression hardening with a steely resolve. "No, Abbas. This is not the way. We will find another path, one that does not require us to abandon our principles, our very identity. The siblings stared at each other, the air thick with tension and the weight of their diverging paths. Gaza knew in that moment that the occupation had claimed yet another victim, pulling her brother away from the values and beliefs that had once defined them. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cramped apartment, Gaza made a silent vow. She would not let the occupation break her, nor would she allow it to tear her family apart. She would stand firm in her resistance, her unwavering spirit a beacon of hope in the darkness that threatened to consume them all. Chapter 3: The Burden of Betrayal. The years had passed like grains of sand through an hourglass, each day a struggle to survive the unforgiving grip of the occupation that tightened around the Gaza Strip. For Gaza, the loss of her family home and the painful separation from her brother Abbas had only strengthened her resolve to resist, her unwavering spirit a beacon of hope in the darkness that threatened to consume her people. Now a seasoned elder, Gaza's face bore the weathered lines of a lifetime of hardship, but her eyes still burned with an unquenchable fire. She had become a pillar of the resistance movement, her voice rallying the community to stand firm against the oppressive forces that sought to crush their aspirations for freedom. Abbas, on the other hand, had traversed a path that had shattered the bonds of their once inseparable brotherhood. Torn from his roots and raised in the service of the occupying forces, he had become a spy, his actions a betrayal of the very people he was meant to protect. As the years passed, Abbas had risen through the ranks, his sharp mind and unwavering loyalty earning him the trust of his Israeli handlers. But the weight of his choices had never left him, a constant gnawing at the edges of his conscience that he struggled to ignore. One day, as Gaza was tending to the small vegetable garden that thrived in the courtyard of their humble apartment, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Abbas, now a man in his prime, stood before her, his expression a mask of conflicted emotions. Gaza's heart lurched in her chest as she recognized her brother, a lifetime of memories flooding back to her in a dizzying rush. For a moment, the siblings simply stared at each other, the silence between them thick with unspoken words and the ghosts of their shared past. Abbas, Gaza breathed, her voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and a cautious hope. I had not expected to see you here, after all these years. Abbas shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting around the cramped courtyard as if he feared being observed. I had to see you, Gaza, he murmured, his words coming out in a halting rush. There is something I must tell you, something you need to know. Gaza narrowed her eyes, her earlier warmth replaced by a wary suspicion. And what is that, Abbas? What could you possibly have to say to me after all this time? Abbas took a deep, shuddering breath, his fingers nervously plucking at the hem of his shirt. I've been working for the Israelis, Gaza. I'm a spy for the occupation. The words hung in the air like a noxious cloud, and Gaza felt as if the ground had been ripped from beneath her feet. Her brother, the same boy she had grown up with, the one who had once shared her dreams of a better future, had betrayed everything they held dear. No, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and anguish. You cannot be serious, Abbas. Tell me this is some cruel jest, a twisted game you're playing. Abbas shook his head, his eyes downcast. I wish it were, Gaza. But it is the truth. I have betrayed our people, our family, our father's memory. I have no excuse, no justification for my actions. Gaza stared at him, her mind reeling, a lifetime of memories flashing before her eyes. The carefree days of their childhood, the laughter that had once filled their home, the unbreakable bond they had once shared, all of it, shattered by the weight of Abbas' betrayal. How could you, Abbas, she cried, her voice rising in anguish. How could you turn your back on everything we fought for, everything our father died for? Abbas flinched, the pain in his sister's words cutting him to the core. I did what I had to do to survive, Gaza. The occupation was relentless, and I I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything, of being left with nothing. Gaza shook her head, her expression hardening with a righteous fury. And so you chose to betray us, to betray your own blood? You spit on our father's grave, Abbas, and on the sacrifices of our people. Abbas opened his mouth, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He knew that there was no justification, no excuse that could ever make up for his actions. The weight of his betrayal was a burden he had carried for years, a constant shadow that had darkened his every waking moment. I'm sorry, Gaza, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. Gaza's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles turning white with the strain. Sorry, she hissed, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. Your apologies mean nothing, Abbas. You have betrayed us all, and for that, there can be no forgiveness. She turned away from him, her shoulders shaking with the force of her emotions. Abbas reached out a trembling hand, as if to touch her, but the gesture died in the air, a futile attempt to bridge the chasm that now separated them. Gaza, please, he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. I know I have done an unforgivable thing, but I need your help. I can't keep living with this burden, this constant weight of guilt and shame. Gaza whirled around, her eyes narrowed to slits. Help you? She spat, the words laced with venom. You want me to help you, after all you've done? You have the audacity to ask for my forgiveness, after turning your back on everything we hold dear? Abbas flinched, his expression crumpling with the weight of her words. I don't know what else to do, Gaza. I'm trapped, caught between two worlds that I can no longer reconcile. Please, you're the only one who can understand, the only one who can help me find a way out of this nightmare. Gaza's gaze hardened, her features etched with a cold, implacable resolve. There is no way out for you, Abbas, she said, her voice laced with a finality that sent a chill down her brother's spine. You made your choice, and now you must live with the consequences. With those words, Gaza turned and walked away, leaving Abbas standing alone in the courtyard, his heart heavy with the realization that the brother he had once known was lost to him forever. As the years passed, the rift between the siblings only deepened, their paths diverging further with each passing day. Gaza continued her unwavering fight against the occupation, her voice a rallying cry for the resistance, while Abbas remained trapped in the web of deception he had woven, his conscience a constant torment that he could not escape. And through it all, Gaza's grandson, Sinwar, had grown into a young man, his eyes reflecting the same fierce determination that had once burned in his grandmother's gaze. He had heard the stories of his family's past, the tales of his grandmother's struggle and his uncle's betrayal, and he knew that the time had come to confront the ghosts that had haunted their family for so long. The stage was set for a reckoning, a final clash that would determine the fate of the Al-Salam family and the future of their embattled homeland. Chapter 4: Confrontation. The streets of Gaza were shrouded in the hazy twilight, the sun's fading rays casting long shadows across the scarred landscape. In the modest apartment where Gaza had made her home, the air was thick with the weight of unspoken words and the ghosts of a troubled past. Gaza, now a weathered elder whose once youthful features were etched with the ravages of time and hardship, stood motionless, her gaze fixed upon the figure of her brother Abbas as he shifted uncomfortably before her. The revelation of his betrayal had shattered the fragile foundation of their relationship, leaving a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. How could you, Abbas? Gaza's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a lifetime of sorrow and disappointment. How could you turn your back on everything we fought for, everything our father died for? Abbas flinched, his eyes downcast as he struggled to find the words to explain the choices that had led him down this dark path. I did what I had to do, Gaza, he murmured, his voice laced with a profound sense of guilt. The occupation was relentless, and I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything, of being left with nothing. Gaza shook her head, her expression hardening with a righteous fury. "And so you chose to betray us, to betray your own blood," she spat, her words cutting like a sharp blade. "You spit on our father's grave, Abbas, and on the sacrifices of our people." Abbas raised his head, his eyes pleading with his sister to understand. "I know what I've done is unforgivable," he said, his voice trembling. "But I need your help, Gaza. I can't keep living with this burden, this constant weight of guilt and shame." Gaza's jaw tightened, her fingers digging into the worn fabric of her dress. "Help you?" she hissed, the words dripping with venom. "You want me to help you, after all you've done? You have the audacity to ask for my forgiveness, after turning your back on everything we hold dear?" Abbas opened his mouth, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He knew that there was no justification, no excuse that could ever make up for his actions. The weight of his betrayal was a burden he had carried for years, a constant shadow that had darkened his every waking moment. "I'm trapped, Gaza," he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Caught between two worlds that I can no longer reconcile. Please, you're the only one who can understand, the only one who can help me find a way out of this nightmare." Gaza's gaze hardened, her features etched with a cold, implacable resolve. "There is no way out for you, Abbas," she said, her voice laced with a finality that sent a chill down her brother's spine. "You made your choice, and now you must live with the consequences." Silence fell between them, the air thick with the weight of unspoken emotions. Gaza could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a tempest of anger, disappointment, and a deep, abiding sorrow that threatened to consume her. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway, and a young man burst into the room, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and determination. It was Sinwar, Gaza's grandson, and the sight of him only added to the already charged atmosphere. "Grandmother, I've heard the news," Sinwar gasped, his gaze darting between Gaza and Abbas. "Is it true? Has Uncle Abbas betrayed us all?" Gaza's expression softened as she turned to her grandson, her hand reaching out to gently grip his arm. "Yes, Sinwar," she murmured, her voice tinged with a deep sadness. "Your uncle has betrayed our family, our people, to the occupying forces." Sinwar's face contorted with a mix of shock and outrage, his fists clenching at his sides. "How could he?" he cried, his voice laced with a righteous fury. "After everything we've endured, after all the sacrifices our family has made, how could he turn his back on us like this?" Abbas shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away from the accusatory stares of his sister and nephew. "Sinwar, I never meant for any of this to happen," he stammered, his words laced with a desperate plea for understanding. "The occupation, it was just too much, and I dash." But Sinwar cut him off with a sharp gesture, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Spare me your excuses, uncle," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've betrayed our people, our family, and for that, there can be no forgiveness." Gaza placed a hand on Sinwar's arm, her expression a silent plea for him to remain calm. "Sinwar, my dear," she murmured, her voice soft but firm. "As much as it pains me to say it, your uncle is right. There is no easy way out of the path he has chosen." Sinwar's gaze snapped to his grandmother, his brow furrowed in confusion. "But grandmother, how can you say that? After all he has done, how can you even consider forgiving him?" Gaza sighed deeply, her eyes reflecting the weight of her years and the burden of her experiences. "Forgiveness is not a simple thing, Sinwar," she said, her voice laced with a quiet wisdom. "It is a journey, one that requires us to confront the darkest parts of ourselves and the choices we have made." She turned to Abbas, her expression softening with a hint of sorrow. "Your uncle is trapped, Sinwar, caught between the life he once knew and the one he has chosen. And while his actions are unforgivable, there may yet be a way to help him find his way back to the light. Sinwar opened his mouth to protest, but Gaza raised a hand, silencing him. "Listen to me, my child," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "The occupation has taken so much from us, from our family, from our people. We cannot allow it to take our humanity as well." Abbas stared at his sister, his eyes widening with a glimmer of hope. "Gaza, you would help me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Gaza nodded, her expression grave. "I cannot promise absolution, Abbas," she said, her words measured and deliberate. "But if there is a chance to redeem yourself, to atone for the harm you have done, then I will do what I can to help you find it." Sinwar's jaw tightened, his eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and reluctant acceptance. "Grandmother, are you certain this is the right course of action?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Gaza reached out and grasped his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Trust me, Sinwar," she said, her gaze unwavering. "The path ahead will not be an easy one, but it is one that we must walk, for the sake of our family, our people, and the future we all hope to see." With those words, the weight of the confrontation settled upon the room, a palpable tension that promised to shape the course of their lives in the days to come. As the twilight deepened, the three figures stood united, their faces etched with a mixture of determination, sorrow, and the faint glimmer of a hope that refused to be extinguished. Chapter 5: The Burden of Choice. The air in the modest apartment was thick with the weight of unspoken words and the ghosts of a troubled past. Gaza, her weathered features etched with a lifetime of hardship, gazed upon her brother Abbas, her heart heavy with the realization of his betrayal. Beside her, Sinwar, her fierce-eyed grandson, stood with his fists clenched, his entire being bristling with a righteous fury that threatened to consume him. The revelation of Abbas' treachery had shattered the delicate equilibrium that had once defined their family, leaving a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. Gaza raised her hand, silencing Sinwar's impending outburst with a gentle but firm gesture. "Sinwar, my child," she murmured, her voice laced with a quiet wisdom. "As much as it pains me to say it, your uncle is right. There is no easy way out of the path he has chosen." Sinwar's brow furrowed in confusion, his eyes flickering between his grandmother and his uncle with a mixture of disbelief and growing anguish. "But grandmother, how can you say that?" he protested, his voice trembling with emotion. "After all he has done, how can you even consider forgiving him?" Gaza sighed deeply, her eyes reflecting the weight of her years and the burden of her experiences. "Forgiveness is not a simple thing, Sinwar," she said, her words measured and deliberate. "It is a journey, one that requires us to confront the darkest parts of ourselves and the choices we have made." She turned to Abbas, her expression softening with a hint of sorrow. "Your uncle is trapped, Sinwar, caught between the life he once knew and the one he has chosen. And while his actions are unforgivable, there may yet be a way to help him find his way back to the light." Sinwar opened his mouth, ready to protest, but Gaza raised a hand, cutting him off. "Listen to me, my child," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "The occupation has taken so much from us, from our family, from our people. We cannot allow it to take our humanity as well." Abbas stared at his sister, his eyes widening with a glimmer of hope. "Gaza, you would help me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Gaza nodded, her expression grave. "I cannot promise absolution, Abbas," she said, her words measured and deliberate. "But if there is a chance to redeem yourself, to atone for the harm you have done, then I will do what I can to help you find it." Sinwar's jaw tightened, his eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and reluctant acceptance. "Grandmother, are you certain this is the right course of action?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Gaza reached out and grasped his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. Trust me, Sinwar, she said, her gaze unwavering. The path ahead will not be an easy one, but it is one that we must walk, for the sake of our family, our people, and the future we all hope to see. Sinwar's expression remained conflicted, but he could see the unshakable resolve in his grandmother's eyes. He knew that once she had made up her mind, there was little that could sway her. And so, with a heavy heart, he nodded his acquiescence, his own desire to confront his uncle Abbas tempered by the wisdom of the woman he had come to revere. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in a warm, golden glow, Gaza turned her attention to Abbas, her gaze searching his face for any flicker of remorse or understanding. "Abbas," she began, her voice measured and firm. "I will help you, but you must understand the gravity of your actions and the weight of the burden you now carry. The path to redemption will not be an easy one, and it will require you to confront the very demons that have consumed you." Abbas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing with the effort. "I know, Gaza," he murmured, his words laced with a profound sense of shame. "I have lived with the burden of my choices for years, the guilt and the shame a constant companion in the shadows of my mind." He paused, his gaze lifting to meet his sister's, a flickering glimmer of hope kindling in his eyes. "But I want to change, Gaza. I want to find a way to atone for what I have done, to somehow make amends for the harm I have caused." Gaza nodded, her expression softening with a hint of empathy. "Then you must be prepared to face the consequences of your actions, Abbas," she said, her voice tinged with a seriousness that belied her years. "The road ahead will be arduous, and there will be those who will never forgive you, no matter what you do." Abbas swallowed hard, his resolve steeling in the face of his sister's unwavering gaze. "I understand, Gaza," he said, his voice steadier than it had been in years. "I am ready to face whatever comes, to do whatever it takes to redeem myself in the eyes of our people, and in my own." Gaza's lips pursed into a thin line, her brow furrowing with the weight of the decision that lay before her. She knew that the path they were about to embark upon was fraught with peril, a treacherous journey that would test the very limits of their family's resilience. "Very well, Abbas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But understand this, the road ahead will not be an easy one. There may come a time when I must make a choice that could change the course of our family's future forever." Abbas nodded, his expression solemn. "I am prepared to accept the consequences of my actions, Gaza," he said, his voice laced with a newfound determination. "Whatever you decide, I will stand by it, and I will do whatever it takes to make amends for the harm I have caused." Gaza's gaze lingered on her brother's face, searching for any hint of deception or wavering resolve. But all she saw was a man who had been broken by the weight of his own choices, a man who was now seeking redemption, no matter the cost. With a weary sigh, Gaza turned to Sinwar, her eyes reflecting the turmoil that raged within her. "Sinwar, my child," she said, her voice tinged with a quiet urgency. "I need you to trust me, to have faith in the path we are about to walk. The road ahead will be difficult, but it is one that we must face together, as a family." Sinwar's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with a mix of apprehension and determination. "I will stand by you, grandmother," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "But I cannot promise to forgive him, not after what he has done." Gaza nodded, her expression softening with a hint of understanding. "I know, Sinwar," she murmured, her hand reaching out to gently cup his cheek. "But I need you to at least consider the possibility of redemption, for the sake of our family, and for the future we hope to build." Sinwar's gaze flickered to Abbas, his eyes still reflecting a deep well of resentment and distrust. But as he looked into the worn, weathered face of his grandmother, he knew that he could not deny her this request. With a resigned nod, he acquiesced, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision that lay before them all. As the twilight deepened into the embrace of night, the three figures stood united, their faces etched with a mix of determination, sorrow, and the faint glimmer of a hope that refused to be extinguished. The path ahead would be arduous, fraught with peril and the ghosts of a troubled past, but they knew that they must face it together, for the sake of their family, their people, and the future that lay before them. Chapter 6. Echoes of the Past. The cool night air carried the faint scent of jasmine, a bittersweet reminder of the life that had once thrived within the walls of the Al-Salam family's modest apartment. As Gaza stood by the open window, her gaze drifting across the scarred landscape of the Gaza Strip, a torrent of memories swept over her, pulling her back into the vibrant past that had been irrevocably shattered by the relentless march of the occupation. In the dimly lit room, Abbas sat in uneasy silence, his hands clasped tightly in his lap as he watched his sister's pensive expression. For years, he had carried the weight of his betrayal like a shroud, the guilt and shame a constant companion in the shadows of his mind. But now, with Gaza's unexpected offer of redemption, a flicker of hope had ignited within him, a fragile ember that threatened to be extinguished by the bitter recollections that threatened to consume them all. Sinwar, Gaza's fierce-eyed grandson, paced the room, his restless energy a reflection of the turmoil that coursed through his veins. He had grown up on the tales of his grandmother's unwavering spirit and the shattering legacy of his uncle's betrayal, and the thought of granting Abbas any measure of forgiveness was a notion that he struggled to accept. As the silence stretched on, Gaza turned her gaze towards her brother, her expression softening with a hint of empathy. "Abbas," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you remember the day we lost our father?" Abbas flinched, the painful memory flickering to life in his mind's eye. "How could I forget, Gaza?" he murmured, his words laced with a deep sorrow. "It is a day that has haunted me, every waking moment since." Gaza nodded, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. The sound of the explosions, the acrid smoke that choked the air. She trailed off, her fingers tracing the weathered frame of the window, as if seeking solace in the familiar contours. Sinwar paused in his pacing, his gaze drawn to the weary figures of his grandmother and uncle. Though he had heard the stories countless times, the raw anguish that etched their features was a testament to the depth of the wounds that had never fully healed. "I remember the way Father's face crumpled, the life draining from his eyes as he fell to the ground," Abbas murmured, his voice trembling with the weight of the memory. "I can still hear his final, agonized breaths, the desperate cries that haunt my dreams." Gaza reached out, her hand grasping Abbas in a gesture of solidarity. "We were so young, Abbas," she whispered. "So unprepared for the brutality that would tear our family apart." Sinwar moved closer, his heart aching at the sight of his grandmother and uncle, their once unbreakable bond now strained by the ravages of time and tragedy. "Tell me, grandmother," he said, his voice soft but firm. "What was it like, before the occupation tore us apart?" Gaza's gaze drifted to her grandson, a bittersweet smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It was a time of laughter and joy, Sinwar," she murmured, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the memories. "Our home was a sanctuary, filled with the sound of Father's booming voice and the patter of our feet as we ran through the halls." She paused, her fingers tightening around Abbas' hand, as if seeking to anchor herself in the fleeting recollections. "Your uncle and I, we were inseparable, Sinwar. We would spend hours playing in the courtyard, dreaming of a future where we could live without fear, without the constant shadow of the occupation looming over us." Abbas nodded, his expression distant as he allowed the memories to wash over him. "Those days, they seemed to last an eternity," he murmured, his voice tinged with a wistful longing. "Before the world we knew came crashing down around us." Sinwar's brow furrowed, his gaze flickering between his grandmother and uncle, a myriad of emotions playing across his features. "And then the soldiers came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They took our home, our lives, and tore our family apart." Gaza squeezed Abbas' hand, her eyes reflecting the pain of that fateful day. "Yes, Sinwar," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. The occupation stripped us of everything, leaving us with nothing but the memories of what we had once called home. Silence fell over the room, the weight of the past hanging thick in the air, a palpable presence that threatened to consume them all. Sinwar's heart ached for the family that had been torn asunder, for the loss of the vibrant, carefree life that his grandmother and uncle had once known. Suddenly, Abbas stirred, his gaze lifting to meet Sinwar's, a newfound resolve burning in his eyes. "Sinwar," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I know that I have betrayed our family, our people, in the worst possible way. And I know that the path to redemption will be a long and arduous one, filled with pain and the judgment of those I have wronged." He paused, his expression etched with a profound sense of remorse. "But I am willing to face that path, Sinwar, for the sake of our family, for the sake of the memory of our father, and for the future that we all hope to build, free from the grip of the occupation." Sinwar stared at his uncle, his own emotions a whirlwind of conflicting feelings. Part of him wanted to lash out, to condemn Abbas for the choices he had made, to make him pay for the harm he had caused. But as he met his uncle's gaze, he saw a glimmer of the man he had once known, a flicker of the brother his grandmother had so dearly loved. "I cannot promise to forgive you, uncle," Sinwar said, his voice laced with a quiet resolve. "The wounds you have inflicted are too deep, the betrayal too profound." He paused, his gaze shifting to Gaza, his expression softening with a hint of understanding. "But I will honor grandmother's wish, and I will walk this path with you, if only to ensure that the sacrifices of our family are not forgotten, and that the future we fight for is one worthy of their memory." Gaza's eyes shone with a bittersweet pride, her heart swelling with the realization that her grandson, like her, possessed a strength and resilience that could not be broken. She reached out, drawing both Abbas and Sinwar into a fierce embrace, the three figures clinging to one another, the echoes of their shared past binding them together in a way that no betrayal could sever. In that moment, the weight of the occupation seemed to fade, and the room was filled with the warmth of a connection that transcended the ravages of time and the bitterness of their circumstances. For Gaza, it was a glimmer of hope, a testament to the enduring power of family and the resilience of the human spirit. As the night deepened, the three figures sat together, their voices mingling in a bittersweet symphony of memories and the promise of a future that they would fight to reclaim. And in the shadows of their past, a new determination took root, a resolve that would guide them through the trials that lay ahead, united in their quest to confront the ghosts that had haunted their family for so long. Chapter 7: The Final Reckoning. The night air hung thick with tension as Sinwar strode through the dimly lit streets of the Gaza Strip, his footsteps quickening with a sense of purpose. The weight of his grandmother's request, and the promise he had made to his uncle Abbas, still weighed heavily on his mind, but his resolve had hardened like tempered steel. As he navigated the debris-strewn alleys, Sinwar's gaze remained vigilant, scanning the shadows for any sign of the occupying forces. The ever-present threat of their presence, the constant reminder of the oppression that had shattered his family's life, fueled the fire that burned within him, a flame that refused to be extinguished. Finally, Sinwar reached his destination, a nondescript building that served as a clandestine meeting place for the resistance fighters. Slipping past the makeshift guards, he made his way to the dimly lit interior, where a small group of men and women huddled around a worn table, their faces etched with a grim determination. "Sinwar," a gruff voice called out, drawing his attention to a weathered-looking man seated at the head of the table. "We've been expecting you. Come, join us." Sinwar nodded, his expression solemn, as he took his place among the gathered resistance fighters. He knew that they had been informed of his grandmother's decision to help his uncle Abbas, and he could feel the weight of their scrutinizing gazes upon him. "I assume you're here to discuss the traitor," the man continued, his eyes narrowing as he fixed Sinwar with a pointed stare. "Your grandmother's decision has caused quite a stir among our ranks." Sinwar took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation that he knew was inevitable. I am, he said, his voice firm and unwavering. And I've come to ask for your support in this matter. The resistance fighters exchanged uneasy glances, the air thick with a palpable tension. Sinwar could see the doubt and mistrust etched on their faces, and he knew that he would have to tread carefully if he had any hope of convincing them. Support, the man scoffed, his lip curling in disdain. You expect us to support the rehabilitation of a man who has betrayed our cause, our people, to the occupying forces? Sinwar met the man's gaze, his eyes reflecting a fierce determination. I know what my uncle has done is unforgivable, he said, his voice lowering to a steady, measured tone. But my grandmother believes that there may be a path to redemption, and I trust her judgment. The resistance fighters erupted in a chorus of protests, their voices rising in a cacophony of outrage. Sinwar held up his hand, silencing them with a gesture. I understand your anger, he continued, his expression grave. But we cannot let the occupation define us, cannot allow it to strip us of our humanity. If there is a chance to redeem Abbas, to turn him against the forces that have torn our family apart, then I believe we must take it. The room fell silent, the resistance fighters regarding Sinwar with a mix of skepticism and reluctant consideration. The man at the head of the table leaned forward, his eyes narrowed in contemplation. And what exactly does your grandmother propose? He asked, his voice laced with a hint of curiosity. Sinwar took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. She believes that by facing the consequences of his actions, by confronting the harm he has caused, Abbas can find a way to atone for his betrayal. And she's willing to help him on that journey, to guide him towards redemption. The resistance fighter considered Sinwar's words, his expression still etched with a hint of doubt. And you believe this is possible? He asked, his voice tinged with a note of skepticism. That a man who has betrayed us so completely can ever truly be trusted again? Sinwar's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. I don't know, he admitted, his voice tinged with a hint of uncertainty. But I owe it to my family, to my grandmother's memory, to at least try. The resistance fighter leaned back in his chair, his gaze contemplative. Very well, Sinwar, he said, his voice measured and deliberate. We will give your grandmother's plan a chance, but know this, if Abbas falters, if he shows any sign of betraying us again, we will not hesitate to eliminate the threat he poses. Sinwar nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. I understand, he said, his voice tinged with a hint of gratitude. Thank you for your consideration. As Sinwar made his way back through the dimly lit streets, his mind raced with the implications of the conversation. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, that the trust of the resistance fighters would be hard-won and easily lost. But for the sake of his family, for the memory of his father and the future he hoped to build, he was willing to take on that burden. When he finally reached the modest apartment, he found Gaza and Abbas seated together, their voices hushed and their expressions grave. Sinwar's heart sank, a sense of dread creeping into the pit of his stomach. What's happened? He asked, his voice laced with concern. Gaza looked up, her expression weary but resolute. The occupying forces have tightened their grip on the Gaza Strip, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil that raged within her. They are cracking down on the resistance, and they've been targeting our safe houses and meeting places. Abbas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze downcast. They know I've been in contact with you, Gaza, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. They are coming for me, for all of us. Sinwar felt the blood drain from his face, his mind racing with the implications of Abbas' words. Then we need to get out of here, now, he said, his voice tinged with a sense of urgency. We can't stay, it's not safe. Gaza raised her hand, her expression calm and measured. No, Sinwar, she said, her voice firm. We cannot run, not anymore. The time has come to confront the demons that have haunted our family for far too long. Sinwar stared at his grandmother, his brow furrowed in confusion and concern. But grandmother, the risks dash. I know the risks, Sinwar, Gaza interrupted, her gaze unwavering. But we cannot continue to live in the shadow of the occupation, to let it dictate our every move. It's time to take a stand, to face our fears and our demons, and to fight for the future we deserve. Abbas raised his head, his eyes reflecting a newfound determination. Gaza is right, Sinwar, he said, his voice steadier than it had been in years. I've run from my past for too long, and it's time to confront the consequences of my actions, once and for all. Sinwar looked between his grandmother and his uncle, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that the path they were about to embark upon was a perilous one, fraught with danger and the very real possibility of failure. But as he met their resolute gazes, he felt his own resolve harden, a steely determination that would not be shaken. Then let's do this, he said, his voice ringing with a quiet conviction. For our family, for our people, and for the future we fight for. The three figures stood together, their shoulders squared, their eyes burning with a righteous fury that could not be extinguished. The final reckoning was upon them, and they were ready to face it, united in their quest to confront the ghosts of their past and to forge a new path forward, one that would not be dictated by the relentless grip of the occupation. As the night deepened, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway, a harbinger of the confrontation that was to come. Sinwar, Gaza, and Abbas braced themselves, their hearts racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation, for they knew that the fate of their family, and perhaps their entire community, now rested on the choices they were about to make. Chapter 8, A New Dawn. The air crackled with tension as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the dimly lit hallway. Sinwar, Gaza, and Abbas stood together, their bodies tense and their eyes burning with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew that the moment of reckoning had arrived, the final confrontation that would test the very limits of their family's resilience. As the footsteps grew louder, the door to the apartment burst open, and a group of Israeli soldiers swarmed into the room, their weapons at the ready. Sinwar's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to back down, his gaze fixed on the invaders with a steely resolve. Abbas al-Salam, the commanding officer, barked, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. You are under arrest for treason and collaboration with the enemy. Abbas stood his ground, his expression hardening with a newfound courage. I am ready to face the consequences of my actions, he said, his voice steady and unwavering. The officer's brow furrowed, a hint of surprise flashing across his features. You admit to your crimes, then? He asked, his tone laced with a thinly veiled suspicion. Abbas nodded, his gaze shifting to Gaza and Sinwar. I do, he said, his words tinged with a profound sense of regret. And I am willing to accept whatever punishment you deem fit, for the sake of my family and my people. The officer's eyes widened, and he exchanged a puzzled glance with his subordinates. Clearly, this was not the reaction he had been expecting from the notorious spy. Seizing the moment, Gaza stepped forward, her expression calm and measured. We have been waiting for you, she said, her voice carrying a weight of authority that belied her years. My brother has much to atone for, and we are prepared to help him on that journey. The officer's brow furrowed, his grip tightening on his weapon. What are you saying, woman? He demanded, his tone laced with a barely concealed contempt. Gaza held up her hand, silencing him with a gesture. Abbas has betrayed us, and for that, he must face the consequences, she said, her eyes narrowing. But we believe that there is a path to redemption, one that will not only heal the wounds he has inflicted, but also strengthen our resolve against the occupation. The officer stared at her, his expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. Redemption? He scoffed, his lip curling in disdain. The traitor deserves no such thing. He will be punished, as he should be. Sinwar stepped forward, his eyes burning with a fierce determination. You don't understand, he said, his voice calm but firm. This is not just about Abbas and his crimes. This is about our family, our people, and our struggle against the occupation that has torn us apart. The officer's gaze shifted to Sinwar, and for a moment, a flicker of recognition passed over his features. You, he murmured, his voice laced with a hint of awe. You are the grandson of the infamous Gaza, the leader of the resistance. Sinwar nodded, his expression unwavering. That's right, he said, his voice ringing with a quiet conviction. And I stand with my family, with our people, in our fight for freedom. We will not let the occupation define us, not anymore. The officer's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck tensing with barely contained anger. You dare to defy us? He growled, his hand moving towards his weapon. The both of you will be punished, just like your treacherous uncle. But before he could make a move, Gaza stepped forward, her hand raised in a placating gesture. Wait, she said, her voice calm and measured. We have a proposal for you, one that I believe will benefit us all. The officer paused, his brow furrowed in curiosity. A proposal? He asked, his tone laced with a hint of skepticism. Gaza nodded, her gaze unwavering. We are willing to work with you, to help Abbas atone for his crimes and prove his loyalty to the State of Israel, she said, her words carefully chosen. In exchange, we ask that you allow us to continue our work with the resistance, to fight for the freedom of our people. The officer's eyes widened, and he exchanged a series of rapid-fire whispers with his subordinates. Sinwar and Abbas watched, their hearts pounding in their chests, as the tense negotiations unfolded before them. Finally, the officer turned back to Gaza, his expression guarded. And what guarantee do we have that your brother will not betray us again? He asked, his voice laced with a barely concealed threat. Gaza's eyes narrowed, her resolve unwavering. You have my word, she said, her voice firm and unyielding. And the word of my family. We will ensure that Abbas remains loyal to the cause, and we will use our influence within the resistance to further your interests. The officer's brow furrowed, his gaze shifting between the three figures before him. Sinwar could see the wheels turning in the man's mind, as he weighed the risks and the potential benefits of this unexpected proposal. After a long, tense silence, the officer finally nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Very well, he said, his voice laced with a grudging respect. We will accept your terms, but know this, any sign of betrayal, and the consequences will be severe. Gaza inclined her head, a small, triumphant smile playing across her features. Understood, she said, her voice tinged with a hint of satisfaction. As the Israeli soldiers filed out of the apartment, Sinwar felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it, against all odds, they had managed to secure a tentative alliance with the occupying forces, buying them precious time to continue their fight for freedom. But as he turned to face his grandmother and uncle, Sinwar could see the weight of the decision they had made etched on their faces. The road ahead would not be an easy one, and the price they would have to pay for their bargain would be steep. Grandmother, Sinwar said, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and trepidation. What have we done? Gaza reached out and grasped his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. We have taken the first step, Sinwar, she said, her voice heavy with the burden of her choice. The path to redemption and freedom is a long and arduous one, but we are prepared to walk it, together. Abbas stepped forward, his expression solemn but resolved. I know the price of my atonement is high, he said, his voice tinged with a profound sense of shame. But I am willing to pay it, for the sake of our family, and for the future we hope to build. Sinwar looked between his grandmother and uncle, his heart torn between the desire for justice and the need to protect his family. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and difficult choices, but he also knew that he could not turn his back on them, not now, not when they needed him the most. Then so be it, he said, his voice laced with a quiet determination. We will face this challenge together, as a family, and we will emerge stronger for it, I promise you. As the three figures stood united, the weight of their decision settling upon them like a mantle, a newfound sense of purpose took hold. The occupation had taken so much from them, but in this moment, they knew that they had the power to fight back, to reclaim their rightful place in the world. And as the first rays of dawn began to peek through the battered windows, Sinwar could feel the stirrings of hope, a fragile ember that threatened to burst into a roaring flame. For in that moment, he knew that the future they had dreamed of, the one worth fighting for, was finally within their grasp.